Yo guys, what is happening? How are you doing? Welcome, of course, back to Rule of Two Review. Today, we actually oddly have some E3 news to talk about, and it's mostly pretty freaking cool. So the random piece of news that came out regarding E3 the last day is information and actual floor plans of the show at the convention center. So we have actual documentation and the straight up layout of what some of the bigger companies are going to be having at E3, as in like the actual real estate that they're going to be taking up on the show floor in LA. Now this is definitely interesting for a few reasons. The biggest reason is it shows a huge layout specifically for Nintendo, which I think is something that maybe a lot of people didn't know to expect. Nintendo's been this weird wild card when it comes to E3 the last couple of years, pretty much since 2013 when they elected to do for the first time ever a digital event, an E3 Direct, as opposed to an onstage press conference. And ever since then, their presence and their inclusion in E3 has been quite a bit different. You know, they've done the digital thing 4 years in a row now, technically. They started the Treehouse thing a couple of years ago. They haven't been doing an onstage press conference. Last year, they built this whole kind of wonderland of Hyrule specifically to showcase Zelda and a few tiny other things that happened to be present as well. But it really was the Zelda show. So they're doing things their own way. They're marching to the beat of their own drum, as people like to say. And it's been interesting. In some ways, it's been really awesome and exciting and fairly successful. In a couple of other ways, for myself and some people, maybe a little bit disappointing. I definitely love some of what they've done, but man, I really wish that they would come back in full force and maybe do a press conference or kind of show a stronger presence. And now comes this cool news that they have a really awesome layout. This is just a floor plan, but they have this really awesome layout for the show this year. Now, it should be noted that Sony also has a very large set of, I don't want to say land, but space taken up within the conference hall as well. Actually, a little bit more space than what Nintendo has. The other weird piece of news coming out of this, though, is how little space Microsoft has planned. So really, that's the two angles I'm going to get at here, is what it could mean for Nintendo to have so much space and what it could mean for Microsoft to have so little. Very interesting stuff going on here, I feel. Now, I'm going to have a couple little infographics hopefully I can show here. When it comes to Nintendo, let's talk about Nintendo real quick and what they actually have planned. They have 3 sections of space that are set apart just for them and their content. They have a 100 foot by 200 foot section, which is 20,000 square feet, a 110 by 90 foot section for 9,900 square feet, and then a 30 foot by 70 foot for 2,100 square feet section. And as you can see, that is 32,000 square feet total, which is a lot of space. And I've actually been to E3 in the convention center, over 10 years ago, but it's the same building. It's the same 2 buildings, I should say. So I can kind of remember and gauge like how much space there really is within that convention hall. And when you think about what this 32,000 square feet is going to look like with these 3 different sections, it's going to be a pretty big deal. That's really awesome. Now, for comparison, let's quickly look at Sony and what they're doing in the same section where Nintendo is going to be, which I think is how they usually do it. Nintendo and Sony, I think, are normally next to each other. They were when I went in 2004. So they, of course, have a 2,700 square foot section, a 30,000 square foot section, and then a 4,800 square foot section for a total of 37,500. And that is a little bit more. That is 5,500 more square feet than what Nintendo has, but they're still pretty comparable overall. They're between 30 and 40,000 square feet apiece, which is crazy. It's really interesting. It shows that they're both bringing a lot of content. So, sticking first on the Nintendo thing, does this mean anything? Maybe it does, and maybe it doesn't. I mean, I don't really have the numbers on what they actually took up last year when they did the Zelda thing, but it's entirely possible they took up anywhere between, 20 and 35,000 square feet, which is very possible. That being said, that was a lot of square footage for not a lot of content. They just happened to build a very elaborate and extensive sort of show floor with this kind of fake Hyrule thing set up where they had, a big Link statue and all these leaves and trees and castle parts that you're walking through and really cool stuff. It looked awesome from the video I saw. And it's like, okay, well, they took up a lot of space, but it really was just for some of the fancy stuff that they built, and all just to showcase one game. Not 100 games, not 20 games, one game. So what's interesting about that, and the reason I bring it up, is to show that the square footage does not necessarily equal games or content. to be fair. And I think that it's something very important for us to consider as we start to get excited about this, because let's be honest, this is really exciting. This gets me excited to see that Nintendo has so much space and so many different sections squared off for just themselves. But we have to look at the reality and say, wow, I mean, if they were willing to take this much space just to showcase one game, who's to say they're not doing something similar? What if they really only have 10, 11 games to show off? Hopefully mostly Switch games, maybe some 3DS stuff as well. And what if they're just taking a huge amount of space to showcase only 10 games, and they're going to have a ridiculous amount of demo units for just a small amount of games, as opposed to a small amount of demo units for a ridiculously high number of games? It's all kind of how it balances out, if you guys can kind of follow what I'm getting at. But let's be real here. I don't really think that that's what's happening. I have to kind of discuss that as a possibility. Maybe they're just using a lot of space to showcase a small amount of games. But I really do think this could very potentially mean what we want it to mean, which is that Nintendo is coming in full force and they are bringing a lot of content. We can hope they're going to have a whole smorgasbord of Switches with a whole smorgasbord of games, and they're going to have all these new surprises, whatever their digital event or press conference, if they do a press conference, whatever presentation they're going to be giving us this year, maybe they really have a bunch of games to unload on us. And a lot of us have talked about this. I've talked about this a few times. The fact that they get to release the Switch in March, which is very uncommon for a brand new console, which also happens to be just 3 months before E3 happens, how could they not be setting themselves up to launch a console successfully in March and then 3 months later have an absolute blowout devastation of badass new content and exciting new games in that follow-up E3 just a couple of months later? They are so primed. They have the pins set up perfectly to knock them down with a perfect strike, and maybe, just maybe, the stars are aligning, and all of this space Nintendo is setting aside for themselves is because they know they're bringing a bunch of games, a bunch of surprises, a bunch of Nintendo content, hopefully a bunch of third-party content and surprises to E3 to give us the E3 that we want them to have, to follow up their brand new console and new business model with what the Switch is. I really believe that that is what could be happening here. Obviously, it might not, and so I do want everyone to be prepared for them to do something where they only have the 5 or 10 or 12 games, and they just have a whole bunch of space to showcase a small amount of games. I mean, Zelda last year showed us that that is something that's possible and something Nintendo could do. But this doesn't feel like that, man. This feels like Nintendo's setting us up for something really fantastic. Now, some other news that did come through this that I don't know the fine details on is there are some rumors about, some elements have shown some people that Nintendo might be booking an auditorium. I will be linking the article below, by the way, where I'm getting this information, so you guys should check that out. You'll see the stuff on the floor plans, and they have some sort of information about how there might be some sort of, what do they say here? Something about the briefing. I can't find it. I'm not going to sit here and look through an article for you guys. But there's some sort of detail saying maybe Nintendo has an auditorium rented. So nothing major to talk about on that front yet. But if that's true, that means we have Nintendo doing a live stage conference, maybe. And then a bunch of games to show us at 32,000 square footage worth of E3 floor space. I mean, there could be some awesome stuff coming to us at E3 from Nintendo. But let's talk about the Microsoft thing, because that's really strange. Microsoft has one section set off for themselves, and as you can see right here, it is a 150 foot by 100 foot section of 15,000 square feet. That is less than half of either Sony or Microsoft. So they are really not taking up a lot of space on the floor. And this has a lot of people talking and wondering, myself included, about what Microsoft is really planning. Why are they taking up so little floor space? Does that mean they're not planning to have a big presence? Does that mean they're not planning to have a lot of content? Or, more importantly, does this mean that there might not be a lot, if any, Scorpio stuff? I think that that's a big deal and a really important question to ask. The Scorpio is something that I think a lot of us have been thinking the industry in general has been expecting Microsoft to just really make this coming E3 the Scorpio show. And to be fair, I want it to be that. I want to see what the Scorpio is truly about, and I want to be surprised and see that the Scorpio is something awesome. That doesn't make the Xbox One feel like a waste of money or obsolete, but also doesn't feel like a crummy waste of time and waste of money PS4 Pro upgrade sort of thing. I really want to see that the Scorpio is doing something really special and interesting and worthwhile and valuable and exciting for gaming and for Microsoft as a gaming company. And if they're really taking up this small section of floor space, maybe that means that they're not planning on doing that. Or it could mean that they're planning to focus so much on it but there might not be anything to really show or have available to play, that there's less of a reason for them to have a floor space. But that still becomes a huge disappointment, because what are you doing for the Xbox One, your current console on the market, a console that I really, really enjoy and that I want to see more good stuff coming from? I mean, Microsoft has really been slowing down this last 6 or 7 months. I mean, Gears 4 was awesome, and I loved Halo 5 the year before, but I mean, I know they make Forza, and people love Forza. That's not my thing. I can't really discount it, but it's like they're not really pushing a lot right now, and both Nintendo and Sony seem to be pushing really hard and trying really hard and bringing out great content. Nintendo's got a new machine. Sony did just do the PS4 Pro, whether you like it or not. They're trying to do something, and it seems like Microsoft really isn't, and this doesn't really bode very well. To be fair, in the same breath where I can say, hey, Nintendo can have a whole bunch of space just to show off one game, and that's a weird thing, maybe Microsoft is somehow finding a way to have a very small section of space, but have a lot of games. Maybe they have a whole crap ton of stuff, and they're like, we don't need all the fancy stuff. We don't need all this space and room and whatever. We're not going to build anything special to get people excited. We just want just a bunch of Xboxes right next to each other with a whole smattering of new games that we're bringing to the show. And maybe they're going to find a way to make the most of that small amount of space. We have to give them room and the space to show us that that's what they're doing. Maybe they're just going to surprise us all, and it's entirely possible that all of this stuff about the floor plans and about what Sony and Microsoft and Nintendo are doing at E3 really doesn't mean a whole lot. But for now, several months ahead of time, and when this news is fresh and brand new and very surprising across the board, I think it's interesting to look at it sort of as a surface level piece of information and say, well, Nintendo has more space than we expected. Maybe they're bringing a whole bunch of kick-ass stuff for the Switch. Microsoft has very little space, so maybe they're not bringing much at all, and maybe there's going to be little to almost no Scorpio at E3 this year, period. And those are both very surprising things, and it's very exciting for Nintendo, and, you know, we're all huge Nintendo fans, so that's great news if it turns out to be that. But I'm also an Xbox fan. You guys know that. I like my Xbox One. I like Microsoft. I love Phil Spencer. I want to see them do great stuff and give more games for us to play. I want cool shit to play on my Xbox One, so I'm hoping that this doesn't bode ill for Microsoft and for what they're going to be doing at E3. I really want to see E3 be kick-ass for every company every year. That's why E3 is exciting. It sucks when something isn't great and something isn't exciting and someone has a bad show. Like, I know some people get excited to be like, oh, Sony got roasted, Nintendo sucked, they got roasted. Like, I get that, like, it makes funny memes for a couple of weeks, but if you're a true gamer, I feel like you just want to see great shit. And so I just want everyone to have great shit at E3 this year. I think Nintendo's going to bring it. I feel like Sony's going to bring it as well. I think the last 2 years has been really strong from Sony. They've got almost 40,000 square footage of stuff set up at E3, so hopefully that means they have a crap ton of games coming, and I'm pretty sure that they probably do, so great for Sony. But what's Nintendo doing and what's Microsoft doing? This is really crazy stuff. But like I said, maybe this all means nothing. So what do you guys think about the floor plans and this early E3 2017 information? Do you think it spells big things for Nintendo and small things for Microsoft? Do you think it spells the opposite? Or do you think, like I said, maybe this really just truly means nothing and we're all just reading into this a little bit too deeply and we probably don't need to? So tell me what you guys think below. Pretty interesting. Cool to be excited for E3, but whatever, man. The Switch comes out in a couple of days, so let's just look forward to the Switch and some Zelda Breath of the Wild and be super pumped. So thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Rule of Two Review, and I will, of course, catch you next time on another video.